Marcus Chen had been having
Humans,
the worst
such a
3
young
weeks
species,
of his
no
life,
understanding
and
of
that was
proper
before the
galactic.
7-foot reptilian nightmare decided he needed to
Information
die.
costs, human.
The
What can you
transport
afford?
ship that
I
was
need
supposed to
passage
take him
human
home
space.
to Earth had
73
exploded in
credits.
orbit,
I only have
leaving him
43.
stranded
You know
on
what?
Cathara
Keep
Prime
your
with nothing
information.
but his
I'll
engineering
find my own
toolkit,
way off this rock.
43
Stay
credits, and a
human.
growing suspicion that the universe had
Why
a
not?
personal grudge against
Running
him.
away
The bazaar
soon?
on Cathara
How
Prime was a
typically
maze of
Sesame?
alien
Us
vendors,
running away is
exotic
typically human.
smells, and the constant hum of translation devices working overtime. Marcus had been trying to find passage off this backwater planet for days, but every species he approached took one look at his human features and either quoted him prices that might as well have been the gross domestic product of a small moon, or simply refused to deal with him entirely. Humans. He'd heard one particularly snooty Vorthan merchant mutter to his companion, "Such a young species. No understanding of proper galactic etiquette." Marcus had gritted his teeth and moved on. He'd dealt with condescending attitudes before. It came with the territory of being one of humanity's first deep space engineers. When Earth had finally achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago, they'd discovered they were the newcomers to a galaxy that had been conducting interstellar business for millennia. Most species treated humans like enthusiastic children who'd just learned to walk. That attitude had gotten old fast. Now, as he stood in front of a Zelkari information broker's stall, Marcus was beginning to think his luck might finally be changing. The Zelkari were known throughout the galaxy as information merchants. Deadly, efficient, and surprisingly honest in their business dealings. If anyone could tell him about ships heading toward human space, it would be one of them. The Zelkari behind the counter was typical of her species. Nearly 7 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted between dark green and black depending on the light, with arms that were just slightly too long for her torso. Her face was angular, almost serpentine, with large yellow eyes that tracked movement with predatory precision. When she spoke, her voice carried the characteristic hiss that made basic sound musical and threatening at the same time. "Information costs, human," she said, not bothering to look up from the holographic displays she was manipulating with clawed fingers. "What can you afford?" Marcus placed his handful of credits on the counter. "I need passage to human space." "Any human space. I'm not picky about the destination." The Zelkari finally looked at him, her yellow eyes narrowing as she took in his appearance. Marcus knew what she saw, a fairly typical human male in his early 30s, brown hair kept short for zero-gravity work, wearing practical clothes that had seen better days. Nothing particularly impressive by galactic standards. "SS-73 credits," she said after a moment. "I only have 43. "Then you cannot afford my information." Marcus felt his jaw clench. 3 weeks of being treated like a second-class citizen was starting to wear thin. "Look, I'm an engineer. I can work for passage, repair systems, maintain life support." "Human engineering," the Zelkari interrupted with what might have been amusement. "Your species has been in space for what, 50 of your years? My clutch-made tees were building starships before your world had invented the wheel. That did it." Marcus had endured condescension, overpricing, and outright dismissal for weeks, but having his professional competence questioned was the last straw. "You know what? Keep your information. I'll find my own way off this rock." He started to turn away, but the Zelkari's voice stopped him cold. "Running away? So soon? How typically human." Marcus turned back slowly. The Zelkari had risen from her seat, and at her full height she was even more intimidating. Her claws, which had been retracted while she worked, were now extending from her fingertips, 4 inches of razor-sharp obsidian that could punch through most body armor. "Excess see me?" Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. "I said," the Zelkari repeated, stepping around the counter with fluid grace. "Running away is typically human. Your sea species is known throughout the galaxy for avoiding conflict. You talk big, but when faced with real danger, you run." A crowd was beginning to gather. Marcus could see various aliens stopping their shopping to watch the confrontation. Some were already backing away. Apparently, they knew what was coming, even if he didn't. "I'm not running from anything," Marcus said. "I'm choosing not to do business with someone who's clearly overcharging me." The Zelkari laughed, a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. "Overcharging? Human, you insult me by implying I would deal with your species at any price. The information you seek is not for sale to you." "Why not?" "Bekasa," the Zelkari said, now close enough that Marcus could smell the metallic scent of her scales. "Humans are weak. Physically weak, mentally weak, emotionally weak. You have no place in Pissus Galaxy beyond assertivitude to your Battisers. The crowd was growing larger now, and Marcus could hear whispers in a dozen different languages. He caught fragments through his translation device. Bets being placed, predictions about how quickly this would be over, speculation about whether they'd need to call for cleanup crew. "You'll die in seconds, human," the Zelkari hissed, her claws now fully extended and gleaming in the bazaar's artificial light. "I'll slice you open and let you watch your insidenesses fall out." That's what happens is when inferior species forget their place. Marcus looked around at the crowd of aliens watching him. He saw the same expression on every face, regardless of species. Pity mixed with mild curiosity, like people watching a small animal about to be crushed by a vehicle. No one was moving to help him. No one was even considering it. For a moment, Marcus felt the familiar urge to apologize, to back down, to find a way out of this situation without violence. It was the same instinct that had led his species to avoid most conflicts during their short time in galactic society. Humans had learned early that they were physically outmatched by most alien species, and diplomacy had become their primary survival tool. But as he looked at the Zelkari's contemptuous expression, something snapped inside him. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about every human who'd been dismissed, every engineer whose work had been ignored because of their species, every time humanity had been told to stay in their lane and be grateful for the scraps. Marcus Chen, senior engineer of the Earth Colonial Service, had been pushed as far as he was going to be pushed. He reached up and began unbuttoning his jacket. "What are you doing?" the Zelkari asked, momentarily confused by his calm demeanor. Marcus didn't answer. He finished removing the jacket, folded it carefully, and set it down on a nearby crate. Then he rolled up his sleeves and turned back to face the alien predator. "I'm not running," he said simply. The Zelkari's confusion lasted exactly 1 second before it was replaced by rage. "Then you die here, human." She lunged forward with inhuman speed, claws extended to disembowel him in a single swipe. Marcus had exactly enough time to think that this was probably the stupidest thing he'd ever done in his life. But he'd been an engineer for 15 years, and engineers were trained to solve problems under pressure. As the Zelkari's claws swept towards his stomach, Marcus did something that no one in the crowd expected. Instead of trying to dodge backward, he stepped forward and to the side, moving inside the arc of her attack. Her claws whistled past his ribs, missing him by inches. The Zelkari's eyes widened in surprise. She'd never encountered a human who didn't immediately try to flee from her attack. In her moment of confusion, Marcus grabbed her extended arm with both hands and used her own momentum against her, pivoting and throwing her over his shoulder. The 7-foot predator hit the ground hard, her scales scraping against the bazaar floor. The crowd gasped, not because the throw was particularly impressive by galactic standards, but because a human had just successfully countered a Zelkari warrior's attack. The Zelkari rolled to her feet with fluid grace, now genuinely angry. "Impossible! You cannot have survived that attack." "Apparently I can," Marcus said, settling into a defensive stance he'd learned during his mandatory colonial service training. "Want to try again?" What followed was unlike anything the crowd had ever seen. The Zelkari attacked with the fury of a predator whose pride had been wounded, her claws flashing in complex patterns designed to slice her opponent into ribbons. But Marcus didn't fight like any alien species they knew. He moved with mechanical precision, treating the fight like an engineering problem to be solved. When the Zelkari tried to grab him, he used leverage and momentum to break her grip. When she attempted to corner him, he created distance. When she lunged with her claws, he redirected her attacks rather than trying to block them directly. He wasn't stronger or faster than his opponent, but he was doing something that the galaxy apparently wasn't used to seeing. He was thinking. The fight lasted nearly 10 minutes, which was approximately 9 minutes and 50 seconds longer than anyone had expected a human to survive against a Zelkari warrior. Marcus took several hits, shallow cuts on his arms and one across his chest that bled freely, but he stayed on his feet and kept fighting back. Finally, as the Zelkari overextended herself in a particularly vicious swipe, Marcus saw his opening. He stepped inside her guard again, grabbed her arm, and used a leverage technique to drive her face first into the side of her own information stall. The impact rattled her teeth, and left her dazed long enough for Marcus to step back and reassess. The Zelkari turned slowly, golden blood trickling from her snout where it had impacted the metal counter. Her eyes held something Marcus had never seen before in an alien's gaze when looking at a human. Respect. Impossible, she breathed. No human has ever. Ever what? Marcus asked, breathing hard but still standing. Ever fought back? Ever refused to run? Ever treated you like you weren't automatically better than them just because you're bigger and have claws? The crowd was dead silent. Marcus could see aliens of a dozen species staring at him, with expressions ranging from shock to fascination. Several were speaking rapidly into communication devices, no doubt spreading word of what they'd just witnessed. The Zelkari straightened to her full height, her claws retracting slowly. For a moment, Marcus thought she might attack again, and he tensed for another round. Instead, she did something unprecedented. She bowed. It was a shallow bow, barely a nod of her head. But in Zelkari culture, it was an acknowledgement of worthy opposition. The crowd murmured in amazement. Many of them had never seen a Zelkari show respect to another species, let alone a human. "Your information request," the Zelkari said formally. "I will provide it at no charge." Marcus blinked in surprise. What? You have proven that humans are not what we believed them to be. The merchant vessel Astral Wind departs us for the Terran hegemony in 2 days. Captain Vex onesses me a favor. I will arrange passage for you. Marcus picked up his jacket, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his cuts. Why? The Zelkari's expression was unreadable. Because you did something I have never seen before, human. When faced with certain death, you did not beg, you did not offer bribes, you did not run. She paused, studying him with those predatory yellow eyes. You simply refused to die. As Marcus walked away from the bazaar 20 minutes later, a bandaged and surprisingly wealthy man, the Zelkari, had insisted on paying him for providing valuable data about human combat capability. He was unaware of the communications being sent across the galaxy. His fight with the Zelkari warrior was being discussed in trading posts, military headquarters, and diplomatic centers on 100 worlds. For the first time since humanity had entered galactic society, aliens were talking about humans not as naive newcomers or convenient laborers, but as something else entirely, something dangerous, something that didn't know when to quit, something that might need to be taken seriously. Marcus Chen, exhausted engineer from a backwater planet called Earth, had just started a revolution. He wouldn't realize it for several more days. The Astral Wind was exactly the kind of ship Marcus had expected when he heard merchant vessel, old, patched, and held together by determination and creative engineering. Captain Vex, a four-armed Genti trader with skin like weathered leather, had greeted Marcus with cautious curiosity and an unexpected level of politeness. So you're the human who fought Snathara, Vex had said, using all four arms to gesture expressively as they spoke. Word of that fight has reached every trading post between here and the core worlds. Most impressive. Marcus had tried to downplay the incident, but he was beginning to realize that wasn't going to be possible. During his first day aboard the ship, he'd noticed that the other passengers, a mix of traders, diplomats, and travelers from various species, kept staring at him when they thought he wasn't looking. Conversations would stop when he entered a room, only to resume in whispered tones after he passed. On the second day of the journey, Marcus discovered why. He'd been working in the ship's engineering section, helping the Genti crew with some routine maintenance that they'd been putting off for months. Human mechanical intuition, it turned out, was actually quite valuable when dealing with older ship systems. Marcus had just finished recalibrating the gravity generator when Captain Vex approached him with a concerned expression. Engineer Chen, the captain said, his primary arms crossed while his secondary hands gestured nervously. We have received several priority communications during our journey. I thought you should be aware of their content. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and turned to face the captain. What kind of communications? News reports, mostly. It seems your encounter with the Zelkari has attracted significant attention. Vex activated a small holographic display, and Marcus found himself looking at what appeared to be a galactic news feed. The first report was from a Vorthan news network, showing footage that had apparently been recorded by someone in the bazaar crowd. Marcus watched himself, grainy, and from a distance, facing off against the Zelkari information broker. The quality was poor, but the basic facts were clear. A human had stood his ground against one of the galaxy's most feared predators, and survived. Sources confirmed that the human, identified as Marcus Chen of the Terran Colonial Service, engaged in single combat with a Zelkari warrior after refusing to submit to traditional dominance displays, the news anchor was saying. This represents the first recorded instance of a human successfully defending themselves against a Zelkari in physical combat. Marcus stared at the screen in disbelief. This is galactic news? It gets worse, Captain Vex said, switching to another channel. This one was from a hegemony military briefing, showing a stern-faced Arcturian admiral addressing what appeared to be a room full of officers. While we have always classified humans as a class, for civilization due to their limited technological advancement and non-aggressive nature, recent events suggest we may need to reassess their threat potential. Any species capable of engaging Zelkari warriors in personal combat should be monitored carefully. Threat potential? Marcus repeated. I was just trying to book passage home. The third report made his blood run cold. A Zelkari military spokesman, his scales gleaming under harsh studio lights, was speaking to a gathered press corps. The incident on Cathara Prime represents a significant breach of established galactic order, the spokesman was saying. For 3 millennia, the combat superiority of Zelkari warriors has been unquestioned. That a human, a member of a species barely 50 years removed from their homeworld, could challenge one of our own suggests either a fundamental misunderstanding of human capabilities or evidence of previously unknown human military development. The spokesman's eyes glowed with predatory intensity as he continued. The Zelkari Dominion demands immediate access to human military installations and training records. If humanity has developed new combat techniques or enhancement technologies, they must be shared with the galactic community for proper evaluation. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Captain, how many people have seen these reports? According to the network statistics, approximately 4 billion beings across 200 worlds. Vex replied grimly. Your fight has become the most watched news event of the standard month. Captain Vex switched off the display and fixed Marcus with a serious look. Engineer Chen, I must ask, is your species secretly developing military capabilities? Are you perhaps an enhanced soldier rather than a civilian engineer? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Captain, I'm exactly what I told you I am. I'm an engineer who spent 4 years at university learning about power systems and structural mechanics. The extent of my combat training was a 2-week course in basic self-defense that every colonial service employee has to take. I fought that Zelkari because I was tired of being pushed around, not because I'm some kind of secret super soldier. Vex studied him for a long moment, his alien features unreadable. Then why were you able to defeat her? I didn't defeat her, Marcus protested. I survived. There's a difference. And I survived because she expected me to run away. And when I didn't, she didn't know how to adapt. She's probably been in 100 fights where her opponents either fled immediately or tried to overpower her directly. I did neither, so she wasn't prepared for it. You make it sound simple?
It is simple.
She was a better fighter than me in every way that matters. Stronger, faster, more experienced, better armed. But she was fighting the opponent she expected me to be, not the opponent I actually was. Marcus paused, thinking about the fight. It's like debugging code. Sometimes the problem isn't in the obvious place and you have to approach it from an angle the original programmer didn't consider. Captain Vex was quiet for several minutes. Finally, he said, Engineer Chen, I fear you may have started something larger than you realize. Over the next several days, Marcus discovered exactly how right the captain was. More news reports arrived daily, each one more sensationalized than the last. Military analysts were debating the implications of human combat evolution. Xenobiologists were speculating about hidden human physical capabilities. Political commentators were discussing whether humanity's admission to the Galactic Council had been premature. But the most disturbing development came on their 4th day of travel, when Captain Vex called Marcus to the bridge with obvious urgency. We have a problem, the captain announced as soon as Marcus arrived. We are being tracked by a hegemony cruiser. They have demanded permission to board for a security inspection. Marcus looked at the tactical display showing their ship's position relative to the much larger hegemony vessel. Let me guess. They want to inspect the dangerous human? Almost certainly, Vex confirmed. The hegemony takes a very dim view of potential military threats, and according to their public statements, they consider you exactly that. What happens if they board? Best case scenario? They detain you for extensive questioning and biological analysis. Worst case, Vex's forearms spread in a gesture of uncertainty. The hegemony has been known to make problems disappear permanently. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Can we outrun them? In this old transport? Not a chance. Marcus studied the tactical display, his engineer's mind automatically analyzing the problem. The hegemony cruiser was faster, better armed, and had legal authority to stop and search civilian vessels. Running wasn't an option, and neither was fighting. That left. Captain, do you trust me? Vex looked at him suspiciously. That depends entirely on what you're about to suggest. Open a communication channel with the hegemony ship. I want to talk to their captain directly. Marcus, that's not... Please, Captain, I have an idea. Reluctantly, Captain Vex opened the channel. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the bridge of the hegemony cruiser. The captain was a tall, imposing Corellian with the distinctive metallic skin and glowing eyes of his species. Behind him, Marcus could see the disciplined efficiency of a military crew. "This is Captain Zorix of the hegemony vessel Retribution," the Corellian announced. "Prepare to be boarded for security inspection." "Captain Zorix," Marcus said, stepping into view of the communication pickup. "I'm Marcus Jen, the human you're looking for. I'd like to propose an alternative to boarding." The Corellian captain's glowing eyes focused on Marcus with obvious interest. "You are the human who engaged a Zelkari warrior?" "Yes, sir. And I understand why that might concern you. From your perspective, I represent an unknown military capability that could pose a threat to galactic stability. Continue." Marcus took a deep breath. "What if I could prove to you that I'm not a military threat? Would you be willing to allow this ship to continue on its course?" Captain Zorix's expression was skeptical. "How would you propose to prove such a thing?" "Single combat." The bridge of the hegemony ship went dead quiet. Even Captain Vex stared at Marcus like he'd lost his mind. "I beg your pardon." Captain Zorix said, "You send over your best fighter, someone you're confident can handle whatever threat I might represent. If I'm really some kind of secret weapon, they'll lose, and you'll have proof that humanity is developing advanced military capabilities. If I'm just a lucky engineer, I'll lose, and you can verify that this whole thing has been blown out of proportion." Captain Zorix was silent for nearly a minute. Marcus could see him talking to someone off-screen, presumably his military advisors. "This is highly irregular," the captain finally said. "But it's efficient," Marcus pointed out. "You get definitive proof either way, and if I lose, you can release a public statement that human combat capabilities have been greatly exaggerated. That should calm down some of the panic in the news reports." Another long pause. Then, "If we agree to this proposal, what are your terms?" "Simple. One-on-one combat, no weapons, no enhancements, standard artificial gravity. If I win, your ship lets us continue to human space and you report that the encounter was inconclusive. If I lose, you can do whatever you want with me, but the rest of the passengers continue on their way unmolested." Marcus could see Captain Vex making frantic gestures, clearly trying to communicate that this was a terrible idea. Marcus ignored him. "Very well," Captain Zorix said finally. "We will dock in 20 minutes. Our champion will meet you in your cargo bay." The communication ended, and Captain Vex immediately rounded on Marcus. "Are you insane?" the Genti captain demanded.
"You barely survived fighting one Zelkari, and now you're volunteering to fight a hegemony military champion?"
Captain, that hegemony cruiser has enough firepower to turn this ship into scrap metal," Marcus replied. "If they really wanted to board us, there's nothing we could do to stop them."
"This way, at least everyone else gets to continue their journey regardless of what happens to me." "But you'll be killed!" "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but maybe not. I've been thinking about something ever since that fight in the bazaar. Everyone keeps talking about how impossible it was for a human to stand up to a Zelkari, but no one's asking the right question."
"Which is?"
"Why do we assume it's impossible?" Marcus began pacing the small bridge. "Look, I understand that most alien species are physically superior to humans in various ways, but we've only been part of galactic society for 50 years, and for most of that time, we've been told that we're weak and should avoid conflict. What if we believed that so completely that we never actually tested it?" Captain Vex's four eyes blinked in confusion. "I don't understand. Humans have a saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. If every human in the galaxy has spent 50 years being told they can't fight aliens and believing it, then of course they never try. But that doesn't mean they actually can't, it just means they haven't." 20 minutes later, Marcus stood in the Astral Wind's cargo bay, watching a hegemony shuttle dock with their ship. His hands were steady, but his heart was pounding. He'd just committed himself to fighting a professional soldier from one of the galaxy's most militaristic civilizations. The airlock cycled, and Marcus got his first look at his opponent. The hegemony champion was a Corvan, a species Marcus had only read about in colonial service briefings. 8 feet tall, covered in naturally armored plates, with 4 arms ending in hands that could probably crush his skull like an egg. The alien's face was hidden behind a featureless combat mask, but Marcus could see the glow of enhanced optical implants behind the eye slits. "I am Warform Thex," the Corvan announced in a voice like grinding metal. "I have killed 137 beings in personal combat. You will be 138. Marcus looked up at the towering alien, and felt a moment of absolute terror. Then he remembered something his old engineering professor had told him. The bigger the system, the more complex the failure modes. Marcus Chen, civil engineer, took off his jacket for the second time in a week.
Maybe, he said.
But you'll have to catch me first. Warform Thex moved like controlled violence given shape. The moment Captain Zorix gave the signal to begin, the 8-foot Corvin launched himself across the cargo bay with impossible speed for something so massive. His forearms spread wide, each hand capable of crushing bones, reaching to end the fight in a single devastating embrace. Marcus had exactly enough time to think that his engineering professor's advice about complex systems might not apply to killing machines before his survival instincts kicked in. He dove to his right, rolling behind a stack of cargo containers as Thex's arms closed on empty air where he'd been standing. The impact of Thex's strike against the metal bulkhead left a dent 3 inches deep. "Your speed is adequate, human," Thex called out, his voice carrying easily across the cargo bay. "But this container provides only temporary shelter." To prove his point, the Corvin simply grabbed the edge of the cargo container Marcus was hiding behind and lifted it over his head. The container weighed at least half a ton, but Thex hefted it like it was made of cardboard. Marcus scrambled away as the container crashed down where he'd been crouching. He could hear excited commentary from the observers. Captain Zorix and several other hegemony officers had come aboard to witness the fight, along with Captain Vex and most of the Astral Wind's crew. "Impressive human agility," one of the hegemony officers was saying. "But the outcome is inevitable. Warform Thex has never lost a challenge. The human shows wisdom in avoiding direct confrontation," another added. "Perhaps this species is not completely without tactical sense." Marcus tuned out the commentary and focused on the problem at hand. Thex was stronger, faster, more durable, and trained specifically for combat. Fighting him directly would be suicide. But Marcus had learned something important in his fight with the Zelkari. Sometimes the best strategy was to let your opponent defeat themselves. Thex advanced methodically, using his 4 arms to clear cargo containers out of his way like a farmer clearing weeds. Each movement was economical and purposeful, designed to corner his prey efficiently. Marcus kept moving, staying ahead of the destruction, but he was running out of room to maneuver. "This is pointless, human," Thex called out. "You merely delay the inevitable. Face me with honor." "Honor's overrated," Marcus replied, vaulting over another container as it was hurled aside. "I'm an engineer, not a warrior. We believe in efficiency. Then be efficient and die quickly." Marcus made it to the far end of the cargo bay before he ran out of containers to hide behind. Thex stood between him and Annie cover all, 4 arms spread wide to prevent escape. The Corvin's breathing was still perfectly steady. The destruction he'd just wrought hadn't even qualified as exercise. "Nowhere left to run, human." Marcus looked around the cargo bay, his engineer's eye cataloguing everything he could see. Standard merchant vessel cargo hold, gravity at 1 standard G, atmosphere at normal pressure. Emergency systems, structural supports, power conduits. Power conduits. "You know," Marcus said, backing against the far wall, "there's something I've been curious about. How much do those implants of yours draw from your suit's power supply?" Thex paused, his masked face tilting slightly. "What?" "Your optical enhancements, the targeting systems. Probably some strength augmentation. That's a lot of hardware. Must require significant power. This is irrelevant. Surrender now, and I will make your death swift." "I'm just wondering," Marcus continued, edging along the wall toward where a power junction box was mounted. "What happens if that power supply gets interrupted?" Thex's posture shifted slightly. For the first time since the fight began, he seemed uncertain. "What are you—" Marcus yanked the emergency power cutoff switch. The cargo bay plunged into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in after 3 seconds, bathing everything in dim red light. But 3 seconds was long enough for Marcus to discover something interesting about Corvin combat implants. They took several seconds to adjust to sudden changes in light levels. Thex was powerful, but he was also dependent on technology that Marcus understood better than he did. "Clever?" Thex's voice came from the darkness, now slightly distorted as his vocal implants struggled with reduced power. But insufficient. Marcus was already moving, using his knowledge of the cargo bay's layout to navigate in the dim emergency lighting. He could hear Thex following him, but the Corvin's movements were less certain now, more cautious. "You cannot hide forever, human." "I'm not hiding," Marcus called back. "I'm thinking." And he was. The emergency power had revealed something crucial. Thex wasn't just enhanced. He was dependent on his enhancements. Take away his technological advantages, and he became just another large, strong alien. Still dangerous, but no longer impossibly superior. Marcus made his way to another power junction, this one controlling the artificial gravity in their section of the cargo bay. Standard merchant vessel design meant that different areas could be isolated for maintenance purposes. "You fight like a coward," Thex snarled, his movements becoming more aggressive as frustration set in. "Face me directly." "Different species, different tactics," Marcus replied, his hand hovering over the gravity controls. "Humans don't fight fair. We fight smart." He triggered the gravity cutoff. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Thex, who had been in the middle of charging toward Marcus's voice, suddenly found himself in zero gravity. His massive form, perfectly adapted for fighting in standard gravity, became a liability as he floated helplessly through the air. "What?" Thex began, then slammed into the ceiling as his momentum carried him upward. Marcus, who had trained extensively in zero-gravity operations as part of his colonial service duties, pushed off from the wall and intercepted the floating Corvin. Without gravity to anchor him, Thex couldn't bring his full strength to bear, and his forearms worked against him as he tried to orient himself in three-dimensional space. "Human zero-gravity combat training," Marcus explained as he wrapped his arms around the alien's neck from behind. "Mandatory for all colonial service engineers. Funny how often maintenance work requires working in zero-G." Thex thrashed desperately, his forearms reaching back to try to grab Marcus, but the human had positioned himself in the one spot the Corvin couldn't easily reach. Without gravity to help him, Thex couldn't generate enough leverage to break free. "This is impossible," Thex gasped, his breathing becoming labored as Marcus maintained pressure on his neck. "You are human, you are weak." "I am human," Marcus agreed. "But weak? That's just something you told yourself to make the galaxy make sense." Marcus held on grimly as Thex's struggles gradually weakened. The Corvin's enhanced physiology meant he could hold his breath longer than most species, but even he had limits. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the alien's movements ceased and he went limp. Marcus waited another 10 seconds to be sure, then pushed away from the unconscious Corvin and reactivated the gravity controls. They both fell to the deck, but Marcus managed to land on his feet while Thex hit the floor with a resounding crash. The cargo bay was dead silent. Marcus walked over to the main power controls and restored normal lighting. As his eyes adjusted, he could see the assembled observers staring at him in complete shock. Captain Zorix looked like someone had just informed him that the laws of physics had been repealed. "He's unconscious, not dead," Marcus said, checking Thex's pulse. "He'll wake up in a few minutes with a headache, but no permanent damage." "This is impossible," Captain Zorix said, his voice barely above a whisper. "War-form Thex has defeated Kraken Battlemasters, Vorthan assassins, even a Zelkari Death Priest. He cannot be defeated by a human," Marcus finished. "Yeah, I'm getting that reaction a lot lately." One of the hegemony officers stepped forward, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. "How? Your species is classified as non-combatant. Your physical capabilities are well documented as inferior to most galactic species." Bah! Marcus sat down heavily on a cargo container, suddenly feeling the exhaustion that came after an adrenaline crash.
"Maybe your documentation is incomplete."
"Or maybe you've been measuring the wrong things. Explain." Marcus gestured toward the unconscious Corvin. "Thex is stronger than me, faster than me, and has way more combat experience. In a straight fight, he'd have killed me in about 10 seconds, but he was so dependent on his enhancements that when I disrupted them, he couldn't adapt. And the zero gravity. All colonial service personnel train in zero-G operations. It's not combat training, it's just part of the job. But when you're used to working in 3 dimensions without gravity, fighting in those conditions isn't that different from replacing a power coupling on the outside of a space station." Captain Zorix walked over to examine his unconscious champion. Warform, Thex has trained for combat in every conceivable environment. But did he train for maintenance work? Marcus asked. Did he learn to think of zero gravity as a normal working environment instead of a combat handicap? Did he practice precision work with tools instead of just fighting with weapons? The hegemony captain was quiet for a long moment. "You are suggesting that your species' civilian training provides military advantages?" "I'm suggesting that maybe the way you think about military advantages is too narrow," Marcus replied. "You're looking at humans and seeing that we're not as strong or fast as other species, and you're concluding that we're weak. But strength isn't just about how much you can lift or how fast you can run." Thex chose that moment to regain consciousness, groaning as he pushed himself up from the floor. His mask had been damaged in the fall, revealing a face that looked like someone had carved it from granite and given it glowing red eyes. "Status report," he said automatically, then stopped as memory returned. He looked around the cargo bay, taking in the scattered containers and the assembled observers, before his gaze settled on Marcus. "You defeated me," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I got lucky," Marcus replied. "No." Thex struggled to his feet, moving with obvious pain but maintaining his dignity. "Luck does not account for tactical innovation. You assessed my capabilities, identified my weaknesses, and exploited them with available resources." The Coven's red eyes studied Marcus with something approaching respect. "That is not luck. That is warfare." Captain Zorik stepped between them. "Warform Thex, you are injured. Report to the medical bay." "I am functional," Thex replied, but he made no move to continue the fight. "Captain, I request permission to revise my assessment of human combat potential." "Granted." "What is your new assessment?" Thex looked at Marcus for a long moment before answering. "Extremely dangerous. Not because of superior physical capabilities, but because they approach conflict from unpredictable vectors. Recommend immediate strategic reassessment of human military potential." Captain Zorix nodded slowly. "Noted." He turned to Marcus. "Engineer Chen, you have proven your point. This vessel will be allowed to continue to human space without interference." "Thank you, Captain." "Do not thank me yet. What you have accomplished here will not remain secret. Word of this encounter will spread just as word of your previous fight has spread." The Corellian's glowing eyes were troubled. "I fear you may have made your species' situation more complicated, not less." Marcus felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "For 50 years, humans have been considered a minor species, technologically primitive, physically weak, politically insignificant. That status, while perhaps insulting to your pride, also provided a certain measure of protection. No one bothers to make war on a species that poses no threat." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. But if humans are seen as a potential military threat, then they become a problem to be solved, Captain Zorix finished. "And the galaxy has many ways of solving problems, not all of them pleasant." As the hegemony officers prepared to leave, Warform Thex approached Marcus one final time. "Human," the Corvin said formally. "You have given me a gift." "What gift?" "For 73 years I have been invincible. Do you understand how boring invincibility becomes?" Thex's scarred face showed what might have been a smile. "You have reminded me what it feels like to face a true challenge. For that, I am grateful." "You're welcome, I think. However," Thex continued, "I must warn you. There are others in the galaxy who will not appreciate being reminded that they are not invincible. Some will seek you out to test themselves against human capabilities. Others will conclude that your species must be eliminated before you become a greater threat." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Any advice?" "Survive," Thex said simply. "And teach your people to do the same. The galaxy is about to become very interested in humanity, and not all of that interest will be friendly." As the Hegemony shuttle departed, and the astral wind resumed its course toward human space, Marcus stood in the cargo bay, surrounded by the aftermath of his second fight in a week. 2 victories that he'd never wanted, that had started as simple acts of self-defense, were apparently reshaping how the entire galaxy viewed his species. Captain Vex approached him as the crew began cleaning up the scattered cargo containers. "Engineer Chen," the Genti captain said, "I have been thinking about what you said earlier, about humans not testing their assumptions about combat. What about it? How many humans are there in your colonial service? How many have received the same training you have?" Marcus did some quick mental math. Active colonial service personnel? Maybe 50,000 across all the human worlds. But if you include everyone who's gone through the program over the past 50 years, he paused, considering, probably close to 500,000. Captain Vex's 4 eyes widened. 500,000 humans trained in zero-gravity operations, systems engineering, and basic combat techniques. "It's not military training," Marcus protested. "Perhaps not, but after witnessing what you accomplished with non-military training, I wonder if that distinction is as important as you believe." Marcus looked around the cargo bay, seeing the evidence of what had happened here. A Corvin warform, one of the galaxy's elite warriors, defeated by an engineer with a wrench and an understanding of power systems. "Captain Vex," Marcus said slowly, "I think I may have made a terrible mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "I think I just convinced the galaxy that humanity is dangerous." Marcus sat down heavily on a cargo container. and I'm starting to worry they might be right. Unknown to Marcus, his words were more prophetic than he realized. At that very moment, emergency sessions were being called in military headquarters across the galaxy. Intelligence agencies were updating their threat assessments, and in the deepest reaches of space, ancient powers that had slumbered for millennia were beginning to take notice of the strange new species that refused to know its place. The galaxy was about to discover what humans were truly capable of. When they stopped believing they were weak, it would not be a comfortable discovery for anyone involved. Marcus Chen arrived at Terra Station, expecting a quiet homecoming and a chance to file his incident reports with Colonial Service bureaucrats. What he found instead was a media circus, 3 separate military delegations, and a Federation admiral waiting in the docking bay with an expression that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. The news feeds had been running continuously during the final week of his journey. Human engineer defeats galactic champion was apparently the biggest story in 50 years of human space travel. Marcus had watched in growing horror as reporters, military analysts, and political commentators dissected every second of his fights, each offering increasingly dramatic theories about what it all meant. The worst part was that they weren't entirely wrong. Admiral Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, was waiting for him as he disembarked from the astral wind. She was a small woman with steel grey hair, and the kind of bearing that made it clear she'd earned her rank through competence rather than politics. Behind her stood representatives from 3 different alien military factions, all watching Marcus with obvious interest. Engineer Chen, Admiral Chen said formally, "Welcome home. We need to talk." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, recognizing authority when he heard it. "But first, can someone please explain why there are news crews setting up outside the docking bay?" "Because," said a voice from behind the military delegation, "you've become the most famous human in the galaxy." The speaker was Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Federation's senior xenobiologist and one of the architects of humanity's first contact protocols. She approached with a tablet in her hands and an expression that mixed fascination with deep concern. "The story of your encounters has reached every populated system in the galaxy, Dr. Bear," Vasquez continued. "More importantly, it's triggered response patterns we never expected from the alien nations." Admiral Chen gestured toward a nearby conference room. "Let's continue this discussion somewhere more private." 5 minutes later, Marcus found himself seated at a table with the 2 most senior Federation officials on the station, while 3 alien military attachés observed from chairs that had been hastily arranged to accommodate their diverse physiologies. "Before we begin," Admiral Chen said, "I want you to understand the scope of what's happening. In the past 2 weeks, we've received formal diplomatic communications from 18 different alien nations, 3 separate requests for military cooperation agreements, and 1 very politely worded ultimatum suggesting that humanity should consider limiting its expansion into contested space." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "They think we're a military threat. They think you might be the tip of a very large iceberg," Dr. Vasquez corrected. "The galaxy has spent 50 years categorizing humans as a minor species with limited potential for conflict. Your fights have forced them to reconsider that assessment." One of the alien attachés, a tall, elegant being that Marcus recognized as a Shi'Tar diplomat, leaned forward to speak. "If I may," she said in the musical tones of her species, "the concern is not merely about individual human combat capability. It is about what this capability implies regarding human deception." "Deception?" Marcus repeated. "For 50 years," the Shi'Tar continued, "humans have presented themselves as a peaceful, non-aggressive species focused on trade and exploration. Now we discover that your civilian engineers possess combat training sufficient to defeat elite warriors from established military species. This suggests either massive intelligence failures on our part or deliberate misdirection on yours." Marcus looked around the table, seeing the expressions of the people who were supposed to be protecting humanity's interests. They looked worried. "Admiral," Marcus said carefully, "what exactly is the Federation's position on this?" Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment before answering. "The Federation's official position is that you acted in self-defense in both encounters, and that any combat capability you demonstrated was the result of standard colonial service training, not military preparation." "And the unofficial position?" "The unofficial position is that we're terrified." Dr. Vasquez pulled up a holographic display showing communication traffic between various alien nations. "Look at this data. Since your first fight, military communications between the major powers have increased by 400%. Strategic planning sessions are being called. Fleet deployments are being adjusted." Marcus stared at the display, They're preparing for war. They're preparing for the possibility that humanity represents a greater threat than previously believed, Admiral Chen corrected, which brings us to why you're here. She activated another display, this one showing personnel files and training records. Marcus recognized the format, Colonial Service Documentation. We've been conducting a comprehensive review of our people, the Admiral continued. Every Colonial Service engineer, every maintenance technician, every survey team member. Do you know what we found? I'm afraid to ask. We found that you're not special, Marcus. Almost every human who's spent significant time in deep space has received the same training you have. Zero-gravity operations, emergency procedures, basic self-defense, systems analysis, improvised problem-solving. Admiral Chen paused. What we never considered was how that training might translate to combat effectiveness against alien species who rely heavily on physical superiority and technological enhancement. Dr. Vasquez nodded. We've been testing the hypothesis. Small-scale exercises, carefully controlled scenarios. Human personnel consistently outperform predictions when fighting opponents who expect them to behave like other galactic species. Because we don't fight like other galactic species, Marcus said, understanding starting to dawn. Exactly. Most alien combat doctrines assume that conflicts will be resolved through direct application of superior force or technology. They're not prepared for opponents who treat fighting as an engineering problem to be solved. The second alien attaché, a heavily armored being that Marcus didn't recognize, spoke for the first time. This is the concern. It said in a voice like grinding stone. If humans have been concealing military capabilities, then all previous threat assessments must be reconsidered. We haven't been concealing anything, Marcus protested. We genuinely didn't know we were effective in combat. We've spent 50 years being told we were too weak to fight, and we believed it. Then why? Asked the third attaché, a Vorthan with the characteristic flowing robes of their diplomatic caste. Did you choose to fight rather than flee? That was the question Marcus had been dreading. Because I was tired of running. The silence that followed was telling. Elaborate, Admiral Chen said. Marcus took a deep breath. For 50 years, humans have been the galaxy's junior partners. We get the worst trade deals, the least respect, the most condescending treatment. Every alien species looks at us like we're children playing at being spacefaring civilization. He looked around the table. I fought that Zelkari because I was sick of being treated like I was inherently inferior, and I fought the Corvin because running away would have just reinforced the same attitude. So you chose violence, the Vorthan said. I chose to stand up for myself, Marcus replied. There's a difference. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. Marcus, what you've done goes beyond standing up for yourself. You've demonstrated that human weakness might be more myth than reality. And now the galaxy is trying to figure out what that means. Admiral Chen activated another display, this one showing ship movements throughout human space. In the past week, we've detected increased alien surveillance of all human worlds. Military vessels on training exercises have been reported near our major shipping lanes. 3 different species have requested permission to establish cultural exchange facilities suspiciously close to our military installations.
They're gathering intelligence, Marcus realized.
They're trying to determine whether you represent an anomaly or whether humanity as a whole has been severely underestimated, the Admiral confirmed. Which brings us to our problem. Our problem? Doctor, Vasquez answered. How do we convince the galaxy that humans aren't a threat without admitting that we might actually be more dangerous than anyone realized? Marcus stared at her. Are we? More dangerous, I mean? That's what we're trying to figure out. Admiral Chen pulled up another file, this one showing test results and combat simulations. Initial analysis suggests that humans have significant advantages in asymmetric warfare, improvised tactics, and adaptive problem-solving. Our willingness to ignore established rules of engagement gives us tactical flexibility that most species lack. In other words, Dr. Vasquez added, we might be naturally suited for exactly the kind of combat that gives other species the most trouble. The Shita diplomat made a sound that might have been amusement. How wonderfully ironic. The species that everyone dismissed as harmless may be the most tactically dangerous in the galaxy. What does that mean for us? Marcus asked. Admiral Chen's expression was grim. It means we're at a crossroads. We can try to convince the galaxy that humans are still the same harmless species we've always been, and hope that works. Or we can acknowledge that maybe we've been underestimating ourselves, and figure out how to handle the consequences. What consequences if the galaxy decides that humanity is a potential threat? There are several possible responses. The Vorthan attaché said, preemptive military action to neutralize the threat, diplomatic isolation to contain it, or technological sharing agreements designed to maintain strategic balance. War, quarantine, or vassalage, Dr. Vasquez translated. None of them particularly appealing options. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on him like a physical burden. This is all because I wouldn't back down from a bully. No, Admiral Chen said firmly. This is because for 50 years, humanity has been sleepwalking through the galaxy. We accepted other species' assessments of our capabilities without question. We never bothered to find out what we're actually capable of. She paused. You just forced everyone, including us, to confront reality. So what happens now? Now, said a new voice from the conference room's entrance, we find out what humans are really made of. Everyone turned to see a figure that made Marcus's blood run cold. The newcomer was tall, graceful, and immediately recognizable as Zelkari. But unlike the information broker he'd fought on Cathara Prime, this one wore the formal robes and ceremonial weapons of Zelkari nobility. Admiral Chen stood slowly. Lord Scala, your presence here was not announced. Admiral, the Zelkari replied with a bow that managed to be both respectful and subtly threatening. I come bearing a formal communication from the Zelkari Dominion Council. Lord Sakala's attention focused on Marcus with predatory intensity. You are the human who defeated Sasthara in single combat. I survived a fight with her, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. Indeed. And that distinction is why I am here. The Zelkari moved with fluid grace to stand at the head of the conference table. The Dominion Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's status in galactic affairs. Admiral Chen's hand moved subtly toward her sidearm. What decision? The Council has concluded that humans represent a potential disruption to established galactic order, Lord Scala announced. Therefore, they propose a solution. Which is... The Zelkari's golden eyes fixed on Marcus. Trial by combat. Single combat between a human champion and our greatest warrior. If humanity wins, we will acknowledge your species as having earned a place among the galaxy's warrior races, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. And if we lose, humanity will formally acknowledge Zelkari supremacy and accept vassal status under Dominion protection. The conference room erupted in angry voices from the human delegation, but Marcus barely heard them. He was staring at the Zelkari lord, understanding something that the others hadn't grasped yet. This isn't really about determining our status, Marcus said quietly. This is about saving face. Lord Siskala's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught a slight nod of acknowledgement. Elaborate, Engineer Chen, Admiral Chen commanded. Think about it, Marcus said, still watching the Zelkari lord. For 3,000 years, the Zelkari have been the galaxy's apex predators. Their entire culture is built on physical dominance and combat superiority. Then a human, supposedly one of the weakest species in the galaxy, defeats one of their warriors in front of witnesses.
That victory threatens the foundation of Zelkari society. Dr.
Vasquez realized. Exactly. So they need a way to deal with the threat without admitting that they might not be as superior as everyone believed. Marcus stood to face Lord Shasaskala directly. If they defeat our champion in formal combat, they can claim that my victory was a fluke. If we defeat their champion, they can acknowledge human combatability without losing face, because they'll have tested us properly. Very astute human, Lord Scala said. The Council is prepared to accept either outcome, provided the combat is conducted according to traditional Zelkari protocols. Admiral Chen stepped between them. And if we refuse to participate in this trial? The Zelkari smile revealed rows of gleaming teeth. Then, the Dominion will be forced to conclude that humans are indeed attempting to deceive the galaxy about their capabilities, and will respond accordingly. Meaning war? Dr. Vasquez said. Meaning the protection of galactic stability through appropriate measures. Lord Scala, corrected diplomatically. Marcus looked around the conference room, seeing the faces of people trying to process an impossible situation. In the space of 2 weeks, he'd gone from anonymous engineer to the catalyst for a potential galactic conflict. When would this trial take place, he asked. Marcus, Admiral Chen warned. It's okay, Admiral. I need to know what we're dealing with. He turned back to the Zelkari Lord. When and where? 1 standard month from today. The location will be Nexus Station in neutral space. The format will be single combat, no weapons, no technological enhancements. Lord Siskala's golden eyes glittered with anticipation. Our champion will be Death Singer Zixtar, who has never been defeated in over 500 trials of combat. And if I refuse, then another human must take your place, or humanity must accept vassal status by default. Marcus felt the weight of 500 million human lives settling on his shoulders. I need time to think about this.
Of course.
But understand, Engineer Chen, this choice will determine humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. Choose wisely. As Lord Sculler glided from the conference room, leaving behind the subtle scent of alien musk and implied threat, Marcus slumped back into his chair. Well, Doctor, Vasquez said after a moment of silence, this is either going to be the moment humanity claims its place among the stars, or the day we discover that standing up to bullies has consequences we never imagined. Marcus stared at his hands, thinking about the path that had led him here. 2 fights he'd never wanted, against opponents he'd never sought out, had somehow put him at the center of humanity's future. Admiral, he said finally, I'm going to need to make some calls. To who? Marcus looked up, and for the first time since entering the conference room, he smiled. To every stubborn, problem-solving, refuse-to-quit human engineer in the colonial service. If the galaxy wants to test what we're really capable of, then it's time to find out ourselves. Admiral Chen studied his expression. You have a plan. I have the beginning of one. But first, I need to ask you a question. Go ahead. In your professional military opinion, what's the most dangerous thing about humanity? Admiral Chen thought for a moment before answering. Our refusal to accept that something is impossible. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Nexus Station was the closest thing the galaxy had to neutral ground. A massive commercial hub built at the intersection of 7 major trade routes, administered by a council representing 12 different species. Under normal circumstances, it was a place where beings from across the galaxy came to conduct business without the complications of national politics. These were not normal circumstances. Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of the human diplomatic vessel, watching as ships from dozens of different civilizations took up positions around the station. The Zelkari had made this trial a public event, broadcasting it across the galactic communication networks. What had started as a simple challenge had become the most watched event in recorded galactic history. Second thoughts? Admiral Chen asked, joining him at the viewport. Third and fourth thoughts, Marcus admitted, but I'm still going through with it. The past month had been a whirlwind of preparation, debate, and discovery. Marcus had spent weeks working with human military trainers, xenobiologists, and engineers to develop strategies for fighting an opponent they knew almost nothing about. Death Singer Zixtar was a legend among the Zelkari, 500 victories in formal combat, never once defeated, and rumored to be one of the deadliest beings in the galaxy. More importantly, the month had given humanity time to conduct its own assessment of human combat capabilities. The results had been both encouraging and terrifying. The latest test results came in this morning, Admiral Chen said, handing him a data tablet. Dr. Vasquez's team has confirmed what we suspected. Human tactical adaptability in combat situations is off the charts compared to other species. Marcus scanned the report. Human test subjects, when facing opponents with superior physical capabilities, consistently found ways to win through unconventional tactics, environmental manipulation, and psychological warfare. They didn't fight fair. They didn't follow established combat protocols, and they absolutely refused to give up even when facing impossible odds. We're natural insurgents, Marcus said, summarizing the report. We're natural survivors, Admiral Chen corrected. Every other species in the galaxy evolved in environments where physical dominance or technological superiority determined survival. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. We won by refusing to quit, by adapting to whatever conditions we faced, and by working together to overcome superior opponents. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on something else entirely. Through the viewport, he could see the Zelkari battlecruiser that had brought Deathsinger Zixtar to the trial. It was a work of art and engineering, all flowing curves and predatory elegance. Admiral, Marcus said suddenly, can you get me a detailed scan of that Zelkari ship? Why? Because I just realized something. We've been so focused on preparing me to fight Zixtar that we never asked the right question, which is? Marcus turned away from the viewport, his mind already working through the implications of what he'd just understood. Why are the Zelkari so confident they're going to win? 2 hours later, Marcus stood in the combat arena that had been hastily constructed in Nexus Station's main docking bay. The arena was a simple circle, 50 meters in diameter, surrounded by seats for thousands of spectators. Representatives from every major galactic civilization were present, along with media crews, diplomatic observers, and what appeared to be half the population of the station. Death Singer Zixstar was everything the legends claimed, and worse. 9 feet tall, his scales had the deep black coloration of a Zelkari who had survived hundreds of battles. His claws were longer than Marcus's fingers, and when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a born killer. Most unsettling of all were his eyes. They held the cold intelligence of something that had spent centuries learning new ways to end lives. "Human," Zixstar said, as they faced each other in the arena's center, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent crowd. "I have killed representatives of 47 different species. You will be the first human, but not the last." Marcus looked up at the towering predator and felt the familiar mixture of terror and stubborn determination that had gotten him into this situation. "Maybe, but you'll have to catch me first." The ceremonial weapons were displayed, traditional Zelkari fighting claws that either combatant could choose to use. Marcus ignored them entirely, earning murmurs of surprise from the crowd. Zixstar selected a pair of the wicked curved blades and tested their weight with obvious satisfaction. "Begin!" announced the Vorthen referee. Zixstar moved like liquid death, covering the distance between them in 2 fluid strides. His clawed weapons swept in perfect arcs designed to open Marcus from sternum to spine. Marcus dove backward, the alien steel passing close enough to part his hair. The crowd roared approval. This was what they'd come to see, a demonstration of Zelkari supremacy, proof that the natural order remained intact. Marcus rolled to his feet and immediately began moving, circling the arena's perimeter while Zixstar pursued with patient confidence. The Zelkari warrior was in no hurry. He had all day to dismember one troublesome human. "Your evasion skills are adequate," Zixstar called out, his breathing still perfectly steady. "But this arena offers no shelter, no convenient power systems to manipulate. Here, there is only strength against strength, skill against skill." "Is that what you think this is?" Marcus asked, still moving, forcing Zixstar to keep turning to track him. "This is what it has always been. Human. Combat in its purest form." Marcus had been watching Zixstar's movements, cataloging everything his engineering-trained eye could observe. The way the Zelkari shifted his weight, how he compensated for the arena's artificial gravity, the pattern of his breathing, most importantly, the way he held those ceremonial weapons. "You know," Marcus said, continuing his circuit of the arena, "I spent the last month studying Zelkari combat techniques. Fascinating stuff. Your species has refined personal combat to an art form." Zixstar lunged forward, his weapons whistling through the air in a complex pattern that would have reduced most opponents to component parts. Marcus twisted away, the alien steel missing him by inches. "But there's something interesting about those weapons," Marcus continued, seemingly unaffected by his near-death experience. "They're ceremonial, right? Traditional designs that have been used in Zelkari trials for thousands of years. Another attack. Another narrow escape." The crowd was beginning to murmur. This human was lasting longer than expected, but he couldn't evade forever. "Which means," Marcus said, breathing harder now but still talking, "they're designed for fighting other Zelkari. Opponents with similar reach, similar reaction times, similar tactical thinking." Zixstar paused his assault, his golden eyes narrowing. "What is your point, human?" "My point," Marcus said, finally stopping his movement and turning to face the Zelkari warrior directly, "is that you're fighting the opponent you expect me to be, not the opponent I actually am. Elaborate your meaning or die attempting it." Marcus smiled, and for the first time since the fight began, he moved towards Zixstar instead of away from him. "You're a perfect Zelkari warrior fighting a perfect Zelkari fight. But I'm not Zelkari. What happened next would be studied in military academies for the next century." Instead of trying to dodge or block Zixstar's next attack, Marcus did something that violated every principle of Zelkari combat doctrine. He deliberately moved into the path of the Zelkari's weapons, accepting a shallow cut across his shoulder in order to get inside the arc of the longer blades. Zixstar's eyes widened in shock. In 500 battles, no opponent had ever deliberately taken a hit to gain position. Marcus grabbed Zixstar's weapon arm with both hands and used his own body weight to drive the Zelkari toward the arena wall. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't honorable by Zelkari standards, and it absolutely wasn't what Zixstar had trained to counter. "What are you doing?" the Zelkari demanded, trying to bring his second weapon to bear. "Engineering," Marcus replied through gritted teeth. They hit the arena wall hard, Marcus using the impact to drive Zixstar's weapon arm against the metal surface. The ceremonial claw clattered away across the arena floor. Zixstar snarled and tried to rake Marcus with his remaining weapon, but the human was already moving, staying close where the longer blades were less effective. This is not combat. Zixstar protested. You're right. Marcus agreed, using a leverage technique to force the Zelkari's second weapon from his grip. This is problem-solving. What followed was unlike any fight the galactic audience had ever witnessed. Marcus didn't try to match Zixstar's strength or speed. Instead, he fought like what he was, an engineer confronted with a system he needed to disable. When Zixstar tried to use his claws, Marcus stayed too close for them to be effective. When the Zelkari attempted to create distance, Marcus used the arena walls to limit his movement options. When Zixstar tried to overpower him directly, Marcus redirected the alien's momentum to put him off balance. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't.